Welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is entitled Engaging the Hard to Reach. This is a story about how National Grid made its intranet remote work friendly. So today I'm joined by my guest, Simon Fitzpatrick. Would you like to do a little interview, Simon?
Yeah, thanks, Dougie. So I'm the Intranet Manager at National Grid. I have been working on intranets for pretty much the last 20 years in various different industries, predominantly financial services. But the role at National Grid came up in early 2020, and I jumped at the chance to catapult myself into a completely different industry to see how intranets and indeed internal comms is applied in a company that has quite a varied workforce with both office-based workers and field, unlike previous companies that I'd worked for. And it's been very challenging, but also very rewarding over the last 4 years.
Brilliant. So if you've been to one of my webinars before, you'll know who I am. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm here at Valto, and we help people build out intranet solutions. So today we're going to be talking a bit about how National Grid have actually built a award-winning intranet. So we're going to start off with a bit of introduction of who National Grid are, some of the challenges that they were faced with, as well as what was the award-winning solutions that were put in place to fix them, and also discussing a little bit about the future of the intranet. And if you've got any questions at all, please feel free to drop them into the chat or the comments feed below. So I'm just going to hand over now to Simon, if you'd like to give us a bit of a background of National Grid.
Dougie, so National Grid, we are a global energy utility provider. We offer a transmission and distribution service. We are present in both the US and the UK. So in the UK, for instance, we own and operate the electricity grids in England and Wales. We operate, but we don't own the grid in Scotland. That's owned by Scottish Power. So our primary role is to source energy and then supply intermediaries, so companies like EDF, E.ON, who then sell direct to consumer. In the US, we're present in Massachusetts and New York, and we both provide intermediaries but direct-to-consumer gas and electric services to around 6 million customers. In the UK, we did historically provide electric and gas services direct to consumer, but we've changed our business model recently. We've exited the gas business, and then we acquired a company about 3 years ago called Western Power Distribution. That has brought us back to the UK direct-to-consumer market for electricity only. And so we now supply electric to customers in the southwest of England and Wales. We are about 32,000 strong, and roughly 50-50. We have office-based workers, and then we have field workers in both the US and the UK, and our field workers are a mix of engineers, infrastructure specialists, etc. They are doing a multitude of different jobs, maintaining the grid, dealing with customers, etc. And so from an internal comms perspective, that has always proved to be a challenge in engaging with them in the same way that we are engaging with our office-based communities. So that's a little bit about National Grid.
Brilliant. So you were kind of touching on there that there's different challenges that are faced by different types of staff. This solution, it was heavily focused on field-based users. So can you tell us a little bit more about them?
Yes. So if we go back to the past, around 2018, National Grid hired a new director of internal comms. And one of the first things that they did was to assess the effectiveness of our corporate communications channels. They also enlisted the help of an external agency to give an unbiased, impartial opinion. And the results were that although there was a lot of good stuff being produced in pockets and silos, holistically, the experience was not good for either our office-based community or indeed our field. So one of the first things that we did was to identify things that we should stop doing and replace, and then the stuff that was working well, keep, but enhance. And so that led to the creation of a channels ecosystem and the establishment of a new intranet, which we call Grid Home, which launched in 2020. And the idea of that is that we have a single source of truth So all information that is broadly relevant either for the entire company or for all of the US or all of the UK is sourced on Grid Home. And then we have corporate communications channels that orbit, in a sense, Grid Home, which are designed to appeal to a particular taste. So, for instance, we have a channel called Grid News, which is our weekly news email. It's like, in case you missed it, if you've missed something on the intranet, and this appeals particularly to our field, but also our senior leaders who aren't necessarily desktop based, they will then see something that piques their curiosity, and then it will take them back to the source via the email, which is our news channel, into the source, which is Grid Home. So that launched, as I said, in September of 2020, and it was an instant success with our office-based community. And I was relatively new at National Grid at that time and only just joined to become the Intranet Manager. In fact, I joined the day that Grid Home went live, which was a bit of a roller coaster and a challenge. But it occurred to me at the time that rolling out a new design, one size fits all, wasn't necessarily going to cut it with the field. But I didn't want to say anything at the time because I was very new and I didn't want to give my colleagues the wrong impression. And sometimes it's worth, giving audiences the benefit of the doubt, seeing if something is going to catch on. But lo and behold, it didn't do that well with the field initially, unlike the office-based community. And that was simply because it was designed as a traditional classic intranet with a lot of corporate communications emphasis. And to the field, that isn't necessarily always relevant to them. And I think that I've always lived by this as an intranet manager, that if the design isn't immediately offering something that is relevant to an individual, and they don't feel that they connect with the content almost instantly when they arrive at your intranet, you've potentially lost them. So for the first 18 months or so, as far as field engagement was concerned, we were languishing around sort of 2 to 3%. So we realized that something had to give, and that conventional ways of engaging with them weren't working. And that's when we knew that we would have to treat them differently.
So in terms of that, though, how did it then evolve? So how quickly did National Grid realise that the one-size-fit-all model just wasn't going to work?
So around 2021, 2022, we reran what we call our comms pulse survey. And that is it's almost like a litmus test to see how effective the new ecosystem was having in terms of clarifying important information, and that the holistic user experience wasn't cluttered like it was before the new ecosystem was introduced. And the office-based community results were very positive, but the disconnect in terms of disseminating information digitally and then having that positively received in the field was actually getting greater than when we first introduced Grid Home. And so that started the alarm bells ringing. And in fact, it has been now for the last couple of years. One of the highest of our corporate communications priorities is to what we call end the field drought, which is we churn out a lot of stuff, particularly information around employee benefits, career development opportunities, internal vacancies, diversity and inclusion stuff, which is just as much as relevant to the field as it is to the office. And yet they weren't really responding to that. Also, key operational messaging, things that we call rapid instant notifications or learning or action notifications, were being sent out via email in PDF attachments. And again, they were getting very low traction. So we thought, well, what can we do to communicate with the field in real time without doing something so different it's going to disrupt them, because they are critical business operating personnel. So we thought about what could we do with Grid Home, and particularly mobile and tablet app versions of our intranet. And then that would address things like the 3 points here on the screen. So National Grid, historically, both on the US side and the UK side, is a mix of acquired companies over the years. And I think not so much maybe 2 decades ago or decade and a half ago, that the importance of cultural integration was being considered as much as it is now. Whereas when acquisitions were taking place in the past, technical integration was prioritized, and then that was that. But I think because there's been a lot of acquisitions where people, have, particularly in our US field, have been at National Grid, but in the antecedent companies preceding National Grid for perhaps all their working life, it's very difficult to get people to change their mindsets. And so they are used to or have been used to being sort of detached and weren't necessarily tech savvy either. And so didn't want to try new things. So both cultural and technical disconnect was a bit of a problem. The other thing is that whose voice matters. Because some of our field workers work in very granular silos, their supervisor or the vice president that is running the operations of, say, our electric business or our gas business in the US, their voice really matters. That carries huge amounts of weight. Whereas, say, the CEO or someone senior at group level doesn't necessarily have the traction that someone that is closer to home has. So one way of dealing with the cultural disconnect was to start to enlist the help of people who I guess are perceived more important to our field workers rather than, board members or indeed the CEO. I mean, they know who the CEO is, but I think certainly in the past, the perception is that the CEO and board members are articulating a sort of a high level group vision, which doesn't necessarily land with the field, although it is still very much relevant to them as much as anybody else. And then
It must
lastly, the
be
technical. Oh, yeah,
it
sorry.
must be something a lot actually that intranet managers get pulled from left to right with all sorts of different ideas about what should
Yeah.
go forward. How did you decide actually who was the decision maker for those types of requirements?
Well, I think the key to any successful design is empathy, and putting ourselves in the mindset of those that we were trying to reach. So with the US field in particular, we set up what we called a series of core groups. So it was like half a dozen people representing each of the three distinct areas. So electric operations, gas operations, and then customer metering services. And within each of those groups, the senior safety advocates who are dealing with our field crews day in, day out and know all of their challenges, their bugbears, etc. But also, we did have some interaction with sort of the COOs, the chief operating officers, again, also responsible for those areas. And then lastly, a network of supervisors. So they all made up each of those core groups. They provided us with quite a lot of information, a whole wealth of anecdotal information, which coupled with our analytics that we were tracking to see what was the typical user behavior of our field colleagues, the two sources of information cooperated one another. And then we were able, through a backlog, to then prioritize what were the foundations of this new design, what we should focus on first. And then we used an approach which is known as Moscow, which is must have, should have, could have. And then we prioritized accordingly. And that led then to a prototype design, which, as I'll talk on a little bit later, emerged from being a classic intranet to becoming more of an industrialized version of it, a toolkit that basically helps the field complete their tasks from the moment that they start work all the way until the time that they clock off.
Um, so I know we've spoken about this in the past before. Um, Investment in the intranet. How important is it that, especially enterprise companies, take investing in their intranet for internal communications?
It's massively important, particularly with new technologies coming down the wire. We'll talk about AI later. On a psychological front, and I've noticed this in multiple companies that I've worked in throughout my career, if people don't feel that their employers are equipping them sufficiently to help them do their jobs, then in theory you have an unhappy workforce, or the potential to have one, because then people feel that maybe they are not necessarily being set up to fail, but they're not being set up for success. And then if the information that they do see on the intranet is not maintained, then they lose faith in the quality of that service, and then they don't use it. And then that has then implications on team mailboxes and help desks who are constantly having to answer the same types of questions. And I think, in my experience, most like-minded people, they want to self-serve. They want to be able to be efficient rather, in what they're doing, and not necessarily have to keep relying on someone else to clarify something or confirm that this is what they should be doing. So investing in something that not only is technologically advanced, particularly with a good search engine that can be trusted, because I know that one of the biggest complaints about any intranet is always the search, can't find anything, etc. But then laying out the content in the most intuitive ways. So we have a motto within our physical team that looks after the intranet, which is called themes, not teams. So in other words, we are deliberately agnostic of structuring our information architecture aligned to the structure of National Grid, simply because it keeps changing like all big companies do. And if we did align it to the structure, then we'll be forever changing the intranet. And people are adverse to constant change. If you change something that radically improves the experience, every once in a while, that's acceptable. But if it's constantly changing, then people just switch off. The other advantage of that is that you then eliminate the prerequisite that people have to have prior knowledge of how the company is laid out at a granular level before they can find anything. And then that defeats the object. People don't think in terms of, well, I need topic A, so therefore I'm going to go and visit department B to find it. They just want the information. So getting that information to our people as quickly and as easily as possible, whether they're office-based or remote workers, was absolutely key. But that requires investment, and that requires good technologies, whether it's a combination as we do. We use the Unily content management system in collaboration with SharePoint Online and Viva Engage. And that has helped to sort of construct our technical channels ecosystem, which has delivered the front-end experience that I've been talking about.
Brilliant. So, I think now would be a perfect time if we could transition, Simon, for you to share your screen and give us a bit of a demo of Grid.
Yeah. Yes, so we'll start off with a video. This video was a teaser that we sent out to our field workers, which was played on digital signage screens and also played at town halls to excite them and whet their appetites about something new that was coming down the wire. Once the video is over, it lasts about a minute, then I'll take you to a live version of Green Homes. So let me just share the screen. that was the video that we shared, and we purposely didn't include any voiceovers or dialogue. We hoped that the visuals and the text that were coming up on screen would speak for itself, and I think in most cases it did. So I'll now pop to the live demo. So this is the current intranet homepage of National Grid. We're actually running a big campaign at the moment, so that's why I've moved the screen down a bit, but we have our global navigation up here. Now this is the root level homepage that colleagues who are not in the field, who are not new starters, and are not people managers will see, because we actually have targeted homepages based on job role profile. Again, we don't have departmental homepages based on business unit. It's all based on job role profile. So this is very much geared towards your typical classic intranet, a lot of emphasis on internal comms and campaigns. You can then personalize the experience. You can see what events are coming up, tasks. I don't have any at the moment. And then if I scroll down, within the body of the page, we have an integration with Microsoft Viva Engage. And that's where you see your feed of feeds, everything that is personalized to you. You can interact there if you want, or you can go to the source. We also have a Viva Engage time with the news as well, where we encourage people to talk about news articles and then carry on that conversation into various different threads that connect colleagues all over the organization, crucially people that you wouldn't necessarily have any interaction with normally, but Viva Engage brings people together, certainly on topics of mutual interest.
Just on
So that
Viva
yes, go for it.
How important is it to tie in social elements into an intranet?
I think it's very important because it allows people to bring that conversation off the page, the text. If people want clarification, or if they want to ascertain employee sentiment about something, then Viva Engage is the perfect place to do that. It also helps to, in a sense, flatten the organization in terms of humanizing, say, senior leaders. That we have a number of senior leaders who are very enthusiastic and will post on Viva Engage, and they will make an effort to respond when they can to questions. And then that makes them feel a bit more human to those who pose the questions. Another thing is that if, and I was saying before, that we do get a lot of repetition where people potentially are asking the same questions all the time. So by putting knowledge in chunks into Viva Engage, people can find that information and self-help and get those questions answered. But what we have also found is that if someone has posed a question into a specific Viva Engage community, and it's similar to a question that, say, someone else asked maybe only a few days earlier, and that the team that is responsible for providing the answer has yet to respond to the second question, the person who got the answer first will then answer on their behalf, unprompted, because they're trying to help their colleagues. And so that really does help encourage and foster a sense of collaboration. And as I'll talk a little bit later on, we're now piloting with Viva Engage communities of excellence to talk about very granular things that only the field would be interested in. So there is a particular colleague of mine who wants people to be more aware within the field. It sounds a bit mundane, but to them it's really important. The correct procedure for replacing plastic valves and steel valves within infrastructure, because that's something that the field are doing day in, day out. And so a whole new Viva Engage community is being developed so that people can pose questions and get them answered in near time, because it's not like Teams, it's not persistent chat. And then they can access that either through Grid Home or direct on the Viva Engage app on their mobile phones when it's convenient for them, amongst other things. So I think it is very, very important that we continue to have an enterprise social level network running alongside Teams, and that both have a very distinct role. So this is the classic homepage. Now, when we started doing our anecdotal fact-finding with supervisors and even some of the field crews themselves in what we call our control groups, which then led to a large bank of volunteers, it became obvious to us that there were two distinct personas that we were dealing with, so supervisors and the field crews themselves. And even though they do have laptop computers, they aren't necessarily connected into our LAN, and they are laptops that have preloaded software to help them carry out very specific infrastructure type roles, with looking at architecture and schematics of buildings, whether it's businesses or domestic property where gas lines are coming in, etc. And that's really what those laptops are for. There's no connection to the intranet or the comms element of Grid Home. So with that, we knew that we were looking at a mobile first initiative here for the field. And I mentioned earlier that we realized that we would have to treat them differently and that conventional communications methods weren't working. So one of the first things was that we designed mobile tablet first. There is a desktop version to the field, but we know from analytics they don't really use it that much. So you'll see now quite a contrast between an office-based worker's experience, which is currently on the screen, and now a field-based worker's experience. So what you're seeing here is a reduced news carousel at the top. One of the reasons why we've designed it in this way is that although we've implemented almost all of the feedback that we've been given by our target audience, the field, in correct user experience fashion, there is still a corporate requirement that we want to inject within the experience. And so by placing snippets of corporate comms information about our strategy towards net zero, but also as things I mentioned in the past, like opportunities to progress one's career or employee benefits packages that they don't often see, which are just as relevant to the field as the office, we put them alongside the key operational elements that they use day in, day out. But with this carousel, for instance, we use the managed metadata features of SharePoint and Unily combined. If we place in a specific tag, which is called field, onto a news article, it means that that news article is then piped down to the field and is shared. It won't be shared if we don't use that tag. And so therefore our comms teams are very selective in deciding what the field will see and what they won't see, so that we are managing the volume of content. Because one of the funniest things that I experienced was dealing direct with some of the crews. I was asking and interviewing them, what is it that you need? And unknown to them, they didn't realize I was part of the corporate comms team. And one of my colleagues said, well, we'll use this if you tone down on all the corporate stuff that we never read. And I felt like saying, well, is that all? That's all the stuff that my colleagues are working really hard to produce every day for your benefit, and you don't want to read it. But there is truth in that as well. Again, I said right at the beginning, if people don't feel that there's an instant connection to the content, they switch off. So that's why we've done that deliberately.
How do you find the balance with content to not switch off field workers? I mean, how do you find the balance of what's the right amount of corporate content for field workers?
So we vary it. If I just scroll up here, for instance, I mentioned that we're running a campaign. It's actually also on the field version as well. So every once in a while, we'll do something special, and we do this sparingly so we can catch the element of surprise. If we were doing this constantly at the field level, they would switch off or they would become blind to something. So Living Our Values, for instance, is our annual nominate a colleague campaign. We have 3 values that define everything that we do at National Grid. And so this is an opportunity to nominate colleagues and teams who personify those values. We have our values, and so colleagues can nominate teams, etc. And last year we noticed that there was quite significant interest amongst the field. So that's why we've reserved this amount of extra communication that we wouldn't normally produce on a regular basis, so that it does capture that element of surprise. And then it's something new for them to see, which will capture their attention. We also have a digital signage channel which we call Grid View, which then runs in tandem with Grid Home. That's currently only working in the field at the moment. So we choreograph when certain things are published on the digital signage screens. And there are QR codes on screen as well. So they can flash their phone at the QR code and it will take them to the source, which is Grid Home. The other part of the answer to that question is it was kind of obvious as to what the right balance was, because in our user experience study, we basically did a day in the life of our field worker. So we interviewed various crew members and found out, well, what is it that you do when you arrive? What do you frequent on a regular basis? And what kind of media, whether it's rich media, visual or audio, do you find is the most effective to help you do your job? Particularly if there is a learning notification that's come out, which is designed to mitigate risk of something that may have happened in the past, or indeed just the introduction of a new system, for instance. So from that, we were able to prioritize that they frequent the internal personal protection equipment, or PPE matrix, where they can order protection, so hard hats, gloves, high-vis jackets, footwear that's appropriate for whatever work that they're doing. But they clock in and clock out. So the first thing they do every day is use a SAP-based app called Fiori in the US, which is essentially the timesheeting for all US-based colleagues in the US. Everbridge is another app that they use on a regular basis, which is a threats database of all sorts of things that, relating to something that hasn't been maintained for a while, or there's a water leakage somewhere, which is then potentially threatening underground cables in a residential area, etc. So it ranges from a whole plethora of different things. They also opted for video training. So this is alternated on a regular basis. So rather than having to answer an email and then do the conventional sort of learning management style system training, it's done in bite-sized chunks at their convenience, so that they are briefed and they can choose when they want to consume this information through bite-sized video. Rapid incident notifications, that's something that they need instant access to. So bringing all of this stuff together, whereas previously it was disparate, they would have a device with hundreds of different apps all available for them to use, and then some of them they wouldn't actually know what those apps were, or they would only use them once or twice a year or whatever, and it was difficult to remember that Everbridge was a threats database because it's known as Everbridge on the device home screen, and you've got to remember what Everbridge does versus some of these other things. So by bringing them in here like this, we're actually able to explain this is what you use them for. So we're making it as easy as possible, trying to make the intranet in the mobile form work with the field rather than against them. So then they can get to their destination quickly. It's not challenging them in any way in terms of their memory of, or what does this do, etc. It just tells them exactly what it does and when they need it. Moving further on down, we've got a whole list of electric safety links. Then there is a safety dashboard, which is uniform across all of our field departments, so gas, electric, and the customer area. And then My Apps. Now, this is probably the most popular feature of our intranet. This is personalizable, and this is part of the new concept that I referred to earlier, or was on one of your slides, about our new intranet. When we replaced the old intranet National Grid with Grid Home, we didn't just want to replace it with a better looking version of what we had before. We wanted it to be interactive and personalizable so that people can control that sort of push and pull flow of information and really customize it to make it valuable for them in what they're doing. So I can choose apps here, for instance, and I can either search or I can pick one here. So I can pick any one of these, and then when I click on it and finish, it will refresh. automatically, and then that additional app will be in there. So if I now go back down, you can see that that is an on-call storm emergency service app, because we do a lot of outage repair, particularly at this time of year in the autumn. The US East Coast often falls victim to adverse weather conditions, and so that's one of our primary responsibilities is resiliency and disaster recovery, so that we can get people's access back up on the network as quickly as possible. So that is how the field have been able to unite all of their apps that were previously on their mobile screens into one consolidated area, which then makes it easy for them. They just click on their device, go to the intranet, and then all of their apps, everything they need, is there in one space. Just conscious of the time, I'll move on. So they have weekly safety briefs, outage reports, which is what I mentioned before. And then the all-important bit here, we've injected corporate information that we know is relevant to them and is beneficial. So LibWriter is the vendor that we use in the US for employee benefits. Labor and employee relations is very important to the US because we have a lot of unionized staff, and then our code of ethics, and then well-being information, etc. All of that was something that they were loosely aware of, but they didn't know how to get to. Now it's right there, adjacent to all of their operating material on the intranet. And so we're seeing an increase in exposure to all that information, when previously the field would very rarely visit. A weather app, it tells you, and this is crucial for them, what is the weather looking like in the locations that they're going to be working in, because that could be extremely challenging for the obvious reasons if they're dealing with power lines and it's heavy rain, they'll have to reschedule, etc.
Yeah.
And then lastly, hospitals nearby. Now, in days of old, they would either rely on paper-based information back at their home base, which may not necessarily be up to date. And what our field workers are required to do is to check where the nearest medical facilities are relative to the location they're going to be working in. So if they were busy and they forgot to find that information out before they left to go on site, they'd have to call back to the home base to find the answer. So now we've made it much easier. We've simply connected our intranet to Google Maps, which is tagged to hospitals nearby. So I'm in the south of England, and so it knows where I am based on my GPS data location. So it's giving me all of the local hospitals relative to my broad location. So then if I change location, if I'm going from one site to another, then this will change as well. And this is most accurate because obviously it's Google and it's the web. So they now don't have to rely on sometimes potentially out-of-date information, or indeed wasting time calling back and waiting for the answer from colleagues in their home base to get this information. And that empowers them to be a lot more sufficient and self-serving.
That's really cool.
Lastly, this is the tablet version. It is similar to the iPad, but this is to the iPhone, but this is much more focused on our supervisors. So there is different sort of information here and a different layout that works best for this type of device. It's set at landscape aspect ratio, whereas the mobile is portrait. And so this allows supervisors greater access into things that they are more likely to deal with, rather than the crews, which is very much the industrial toolkit, the need to know based on operational requirements. So I'll stop sharing there and I'll hand then back to you, Dougie.
I think the interesting thing for me with all of that is that it's really been boiled down to what those field workers need. And I think that's something that often when I've seen other intranets in the past before, as you said, fallen over this kind of one model fits all, and it really doesn't. It doesn't
No.
at all. And I really like this sort of simplicity of that. And you can imagine a field worker that's out cold, raining, things like that. The UI of that was perfect for large sort of tiles and things like that to click. If you've got cold fingers and things like that, I imagine it would be a nightmare to click little buttons and things. So I think that looks fantastic.
Great.
Cool. So what I suppose the next thing is how do you build trust with your users? So how do you build trust for your users that your intranet is going to deliver what they want to?
So you probably saw on the video, there was a phrase, built by the field for the field. So even though the intranet team or the comms team at National Grid was the facilitator in collecting all of the feedback, both analytical and anecdotal, and then we came up with initial prototype designs, the control groups, and then later, which lasted 6 months, we had a team of 60 volunteers in the field. We're using the new version of Grid Home in parallel with the non-field version. And they were feeding back so that we could finesse and tweak everything at every step of the way. But what I think made this successful was that it was a collaboration, working and listening to the people who we were trying to perfect a solution for, rather than just giving them something arbitrary that we thought would work and not actually consulting with any of them. I'm obviously based in the UK, and I haven't actually met any US field worker that we've developed this for, but over the last 2 and a bit years, I've actually built up a rapport with quite a few of them, where we're now on sort of first name basis, that kind of stuff. Because it's very important to me that if we're going to be doing something on the intranet to genuinely help people do their jobs, you've got to build up that trust. And the trust only really comes with empathy when the team that's trying to come up with a solution is showing willingness to actually understand what the challenges are, and then make sometimes decisions or even concessions that aren't necessarily in line with what my reporting structure would want. So initially, the comms hierarchy at National Grid wanted a lot more comms on here. And at the beginning of the project, I was compelled to do all of that. But then as I got to know more about what their needs were, I challenged and then reduced the amount of comms and explained the reasons why. And of course, the comms hierarchy then accepted that. And that won, I think, the trust, or at least hopefully I like to think the respect of some of our field workers that we were engaging with, because we were taking on board and treating their points and their ideas seriously. And so when we launched all of this under that sort of banner of built by the field for the field, that attracted a lot of interest. And thus far, I mean, we get, some people are always averse to change, and you get, constructive criticism. We haven't had anyone who's just complained for the sake of it. But in each and every case where someone has been critical, it's taking the lines of, but you could go even further with this, rather than fundamentally everything that you've done is bad. So we take that as an example of building up trust. And I also remember saying to a colleague about 2 years ago, it was something along the lines of, okay, well, we'll probably be working with you for a few weeks because you're group, and then you'll disappear and we'll never hear from you again. And this thing will, fall by the wayside shortly after that. And I said to them at the time, no, I'm afraid you're stuck with me, because we're here for the long haul. Yeah, we're serious about this. We want to bring you onto the intranet, not for the sake of it, but because we genuinely feel that this is a unique opportunity to enhance your working experience. Now, of course, the same person is saying, oh, God, I can't get rid of you. Oh, because I keep having to listen to my voice every week when we have catch-ups. But I like to think that's a positive thing, because we've stayed the long haul with them, and they now know that we are serious, because this is an investment. This is not the completion of the field experience. It's the beginning of this story. So another motto that we have in our team is called Grow and Evolve, where we're constantly reevaluating and growing and evolving the intranet. And we're in the process, actually, of doing a project called Grid Home 2.0, because our intranet is now 4 years old. So we're looking holistically about where can we take it to the future? What are the next steps? What is sort of the next generation experience? And we can talk a little bit of that later on when it comes to digital workplaces and AI.
So, what's the biggest mistake companies make when designing an intranet?
Uh, well, I think I've answered this earlier on. Designing the information architecture to be aligned to the organization.
Mm,
Not putting in a robust, evolved publishing model that's strategic so
yeah.
that people understand that their responsibility of maintaining content is very important and that they should be benchmarked on that in their annual appraisal, so that they take it seriously and it's not just a chore for them to have to do. And that training has to be effective so that people understand that, there's more to just putting a website page, a collection of web parts in SharePoint or widgets as it's known in Unily together. It requires an understanding of user experience, accessibility, usability, brand adherence, and then writing for this particular medium, the web, because it's different to everything else. Now, with developed publishers, we're not expecting people who are finance experts or engineers to understand fully all of those things because that's not their skill set or their job. But at least to be introduced to the basics of that is imperative. If you launch a brand new intranet and have a big campaign about how wonderful it is and it's going to do all of these things and make your life easier, and then the mindset is, well, that's the end of the project. We've launched it. Now let's move on to the next thing. That's another big mistake. So just like with the field, I said a moment ago that this is the beginning of their journey. The whole intranet is constantly evolving,
Mm.
and that we're on a journey that could take years, if ever, to fully realize because our requirements are changing. And so therefore we are flexible to adapt to the changing needs of National Grid. And so we're fortunate in National Grid that they realized back in 2018 that the intranet wasn't fit for purpose. And so they have invested quite a lot of time and money in Grid Home. And now they're continuing to do that by having a strategic devolved publishing model, robust as much as we can make it. And then, of course, training and assigning responsibility of content, not to individuals, but to job roles. So if, the head of finance is ultimately responsible for all the finance pages. So if Joe Bloggs leaves the business and they've been managing all the finance pages, then it's incumbent on whoever is the head of finance to then find a replacement for that person. And then that makes it easy for us to be able to go and find whom is the right person to ask to initiate that replacement, rather than it just being left to rot and then it's of no use to anyone. And it's certainly not then returning investment in various different forms.
Just conscious of time on this one, but how did the implementation of the rapid incident notifications actually build that trust with field workers?
Yes, so I will share my screen again if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the I think probably the biggest bugbear. 1 second. Share. There we are. The biggest bugbear with the field was, and I heard this a lot, when something significant happens, we never find out about it in time, or if we do, we find out about it like 3 months later, and it's way after the fact. And then again, that made them feel like that they weren't important or being considered to be important. And our demographic study of our field contingent, this is now changing, and changing in a good way. But a lot of our US field workers are over the age of 42, they're male, and they've been at National Grid for more than 12 years. So a lot of them aren't particularly tech savvy. They don't always respond to email. And rapid incident notifications were typically being sent via PDF attachments in email. Of course, they weren't really being looked at. The only way that they would be disseminated successfully is via what we call a start of the day huddle, where the supervisor would meet with all the crews in their home base to give them their assignments, and then off they go and they do their jobs. So with the mobile app variant control that the Unily content management system offers, we can take advantage of push notifications. So here is a rapid incident, which has been reported as a near miss, which means an accident could have happened, but thankfully it didn't happen. But even if that's the case, it still has to be reported so we can mitigate the risk in the future. And this was to do with a crane being attached to some rigging, and that the eye of the rigging here to connect bolts, I guess, for the crane, I'm not an expert on this type of thing, was set incorrectly, and it could have caused the entire crane to capsize and collapse. And you imagine if that had fallen on someone, it probably would have killed them. So this is the desktop view of it. If I just switch into here, so you can see this is the Grid Home app on a typical company device. Now, the message here is relating to something different, but we now have, in uppercase, rapid incident notification, please read, or action required. And then it leads them into that particular screen that you've just seen. Now, we were doing that initially where the system was set just to alert them every time we publish something, but we've toned that down, and we now do scheduled push notifications for the most important things. Again, like with the Living Our Values promo, we use certain things sparingly to capture the element of surprise so they'll see it, because all being well, we don't have rapid incidents happening constantly. In fact, we don't, which is good. We have a good safety record, but occasionally accidents do happen. So that's how it renders on screen. And then a slightly different example. This is then how it renders within the mobile screen. So as you said earlier, Dougie, about being out on a cold, wintry day, there's less stuff to have to click. All buttons are big. Then we also just, we try to be minimal with text and explain that, you know, this is how you attach, in this case, conductor keepers into a particular apparatus. And here are all the different types of bolts that have to be used and the exact procedure of how you connect them. So in theory, they don't then have to ask someone. They can just follow all of this. But if they do need to ask someone, then the person who is the author and is the lead coordinator in this case, Brian, who I deal with a lot, they can be contacted immediately. And then there is an option to either contact them via email or via Teams when you click on the emoticon of the individual. Similar one here. This is now on the iPad. This one has been the most successful, actually. Talking about rock lifting tools and the different options. Again, it's not my field, but having all of the different steps articulated both in text and visually so that they understand exactly what they need to do. And if I may, I'll just switch to here. So this is a analysis sort of screenshot from our system of how well some of these new specific, very operational rapid incident notifications have fared. So you can see we've had over 892 unique users look at a variety of these. We regard the unique users to be far more important a metric than the total number of views, but between 892 people, they have generated 1,365 views. The average dwell time that we record is almost a minute, which suggests to us that they are actually reading and absorbing the information.
Yeah.
And then some of the anecdotal feedback. From a field supervisor, you know, we already had one lineman ask, what are these keepers you were talking about? Which tells me he never saw it beforehand. So although they are exposed to all this information, you know, printed manuals in their barns and yards, now we're actually bringing it to them in real time when it matters, when it's relevant to them, to help them do their jobs. So this has been a welcome review of a greater advance into the granularity of operational info on Grid Home.
So what were the outcomes and the results following the implementation of this new change?
So while we were doing the pilot phase, people were becoming aware of a new version of Grid Home for the field coming. So we were seeing over time an increase from, say, 2 or 3 or 4% up to 18% prior to the formal launch. But then immediately after launch, that doubled with our two largest field areas, so electric and gas. So previously they were on 18% and 20%, and then they went to 43 and 46%. And then the quarter immediately after the time that we launched, that increased again, albeit in a small way. That was back in Q4 of 23-24. The equivalent of this financial year is that we're almost hitting 50%. So it's a slow process because things take a while to affect change in the field. But this is certainly not what I would call a novelty, that something new and shiny was introduced. And then when the interest waned, the stats went back down to 2 or 3% again. Is actually held now for more than a year and is continuing to increase. So at the time of launch, comparing Q1 to Q4 of 23-24, that represents, in terms of audience engagement and usage, 144% increase for electric and then 155% increase for gas. We do have a smaller team that actually has gone down a little bit, but they're about 300 or 400 people, where gas and electric combined is over 7,000 people. So although we're a little bit surprised about the customer metering services audience, we weren't too disappointed because the two big ones continue to increase. We also reskinned the mobile app so that it was visually consistent with the logo of Grid Home, because before that we were using Unily, our vendor, their free app, and so people weren't necessarily equating that an app called Unily was actually the National Grid Intranet. So since that introduction, we've seen usage of the app increase by 500%. Now that's a massive figure. The reality is that when you compare that in a pie chart out of 100%, we've gone from little or no usage of the app to something like 45 to 55%. And that also includes non-field people as well using it since we reskinned the app. So people have now become aware of it and are starting to use it, whereas before it was pretty much ignored. Finally, as we were completing our pilot phase, we asked the field, our sort of early adopters, plus also people who didn't know that this change was coming. We put a lot more people into our sort of secured preview audience, and then put an emoticon survey at the top of the screen, and then just asked them to rate through either an unhappy face or a smiley face, and obviously different faces in between, to rate their experience. Now, we thought we would only get maybe 50 or 60 responses, but we actually got 750 responses over a 6-week period. And the net promoter score that we achieved was positive 62%. We were aiming for positive 30%, but we actually managed to double that in size. The percentage rating is great, but the number of people responding was even better, because it shows that the rest of these stats are true, that engagement has really been uplifted because we've created something that matters to them and that they know that this is relevant to them. They understand what's in it for them, and so therefore they're being drawn to it. And so the stats speak for themselves.
What's the secret to an award-winning intranet?
I think it's about making it, as you say there, as user-centric as possible, so that you establish very early on that this is something that people can customize and make it their own, and it is not arbitrary, and it has the flexibility to pin all sorts of things on a homepage screen or elsewhere, so that people can access content as quickly as possible that matters to them. And it has that versatility to be so many different things for different types of job role personas. So, for instance, talking with some of our PAs, what really matters to them is easy access into, say, the Outlook calendars of all the senior leaders that they support. And if that could be integrated through a portlet on an intranet screen, that would really make their lives significantly easier and better when they're at work. Whereas you compare that to then, say, the field people, which you've just seen on the mobile view, that it's very much geared to what works for them, and it's working with them rather than against them. And I think, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, I think the success of the current intranet of today is also understanding where we're headed and how much life is there left in a classic browser-based intranet, and having very defined and distinct channels of experiences so that people understand you use Microsoft Teams for this, you use Aviva Engage for that, SharePoint for this, your intranet for that, that kind of stuff, rather than it being sort of a blur of disparate apps and tools and features and experiences, which then is overwhelming to everybody. It's about having a fathomable digital workplace as such, with your intranet being that gateway to all of it, rather than intranet just sort of floating off in the ether, just another thing for people to use, which they then get, disheartened by or confused by.
So just on that, how do you incorporate corporate values into an intranet?
So there are various different ways. Obviously, the news is your key channel to articulate not only what the values are, but then to demonstrate how people personify those values and the benefits that can bring, both for efficiency, revenue growth. In our case, we have a big strategy called Responsible Business, which encompasses how we are careful with the environment when we're working outside, but also then in embracing a diverse workforce. And I think our head of diversity put it brilliantly, that how can we truly understand our customers' needs if our organization does not reflect society? Society is diverse, so therefore our organization needs to be diverse. So then having that resonate through, even at a subtle level beyond the news, on static pages, where there is a reference to the relevant value, when it matters most. We don't want to run the risk of spoon feeding or spamming people with stuff so that they become annoyed or they feel patronized or talked down to with constant references to the values. But then the Living Our Values competition that you've seen, an opportunity for a bit of interaction, where you can nominate people through the intranet. And there's also a quiz, so a bit of gamification that we put on the intranet as well, where we test people on their knowledge of the values. And we found some very interesting behavioral traits in the statistics, where there's a pass rate of about 80%. And a couple of people were passing the minimum threshold first time, but then they were going in and answering the quiz again when they didn't have to. And obviously that benefited us, because the more they're exposed to it, the more they're going to understand the values. But we worked out it was because people were competing with one another in their own teams. So person A only got 85% and realized that person B got 90%. So then person A went in and tried their luck to see if they could get even more, which is that was an unexpected bonus, but that is gamification, working really well.
Yeah.
And then there was one person who, I think it was 8 attempts, and then they got 100%. Which is, so obviously you haven't got anything else to do at that time, but still it's great, because then the people who articulate the values were pleased, because it means that person is now going to know them, off by heart.
Yeah.
But it also shows that the intranet can be a facilitator for things as well, like that. So all sorts of different ways that you can sprinkle it across your intranet experience.
So we've talked a lot about the intranet so far. We've not really talked a huge amount about what the award that you recently won is. So just to say congratulations again on winning that award.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the award and sort of what the factors were that ran up to National Grid winning that award?
Yeah, so we won Best Relaunched Channel with the IOIC, which is the Institute of Internal Communications, and they are a body that's been around for about 70 odd years. And they've certainly kept up with the times, understanding the importance of corporate communications in the digital world. And at the risk of sounding like I'm blowing my own trumpet, we did actually win Best Intranet with them in 2021, which I kind of equate as for the office-based community experience, because we hadn't actually launched to the field at that time when we won the award. But we we'd been absent from the IORC by a couple of years. And then we thought, well, with all the success that we've had with the field, why don't we resubmit? But this time demonstrating that we have been true to our word, that we grow and evolve our experience and we learn from mistakes. And we also understand that, as you quite rightly say at the beginning, that one size never fits all. And so it's almost like it was completing the set, really, that we were now submitting Grid Home for a potential award for the field experience, so that we've completed the launch of the new intranet, albeit it's taken a little bit longer. So the synopsis that we put together for the award was, I guess, a combination of everything we've just been discussing. That what are the challenges with the field? How can we engage them in a way that's not going to disrupt them? How can we then, and I use this term a lot, infiltrate existing operational content and then inject stuff like the values or other things that they will benefit from, so that they will pick it up and see it, so that we are subtly introducing other things to them in the hope that they will then, what we call, go beyond the homepage. So that's another key metric of ours. And if we get time, I can show you some of the bits there, that we go beyond the homepage. So they then start to be proactive and explore the rest of the intranet, which we know from our stats they are beginning to do. And I think that there is certainly a trend at the moment that a lot of big companies that have a diverse workforce, where you have remote workers, whether it's energy like us, or even I have a good friend who works for Sainsbury's, and Viva Engage is a huge success at the supermarket level because they don't have connection into back office. And at Barclays, although this is going back a few years, the branch network always felt, based on employee opinion survey results, that they were stuck in the branch network. So then an app was introduced so that they could see the job vacancies. And then a year later, HR recorded a surge in internal applicants for back office roles at Barclays. And then, of course, the following year, the employee opinion survey was, the sentiment had improved quite significantly. So dealing with the challenge of your diversified workforce is a topic of discussion at the moment in various sort of consultative groups and various intranet sort of strategy bodies. So if you're familiar with the Digital Workplace Group, which was formerly the Intranet Benchmarking Forum, Paul Miller runs that. That's being discussed quite a lot at the moment. And indeed, Intranet Reloaded is another forum that's international, has been discussing quite a lot about how are we going to make the intranet as diversified as possible. And now when you think of it, post-COVID, you have a lot of office-based workers who are now working from home.
Yeah.
So people are beginning to realize that intranet designs have to adapt because our working practices and behaviors are changing. So I think the award that we successfully won is a new category that I think we'll be seeing a lot in other award ceremonies coming up soon. That it's not just about forward thinking, it's about the here and now. How can we make the intranet a valuable resource for people across a multitude of different requirements that perhaps wasn't so varied, 10 years ago, or even earlier than that. So that's where, we've really tried to be audience focused, audience first, really get inside the heads of our field workers. And thankfully the IOSC agreed with us and gave us the award.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I think obviously it's testament to the hard work that you guys have put in to win
Thank you.
that award. So just as we're nearing the end, it'd be interesting to understand from you how you've gone about measuring. So how do you measure the return on investment from an intranet?
So one of the, and I'll share my screen if I may again in a few seconds. Excuse me. One of the ways in which we do it is how much time potentially people are saving. And when Grid Home first went live in 2020 with the office-based community, we were benchmarking around 1,000 people, getting them to test the speed with which they could find something and the accuracy of that information on the new intranet versus the old. And we didn't have obviously 1,000 people respond to that, but we had, a couple of hundred people respond. And the average response was that it was saving people on around 30 minutes per week in lost time that they would have wasted trying to find the information on the old intranet. And even if they did find it, it wasn't necessarily up to date.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I share my screen, when we completed the field pilot, so this is now with 60 volunteers as opposed to the small control groups I was talking about. So when we switched into our full pilot mode, which was 60 volunteers, moving on from the original control group of half a dozen people representing each of the different areas of the field, we had 59 out of 60 people respond to the end of our sort of pilot survey that was for all of the changes that we've done to make Grid Home field user-friendly. So we had, based on experience of using Grid Home, how easy is the intranet to use, we had 7.86%. So the vast majority of people saying, 1 being very difficult and 10 being really, really easy. You can see here from the graph that it was overwhelmingly positive. Then the next question we asked is, based on your experience, how relevant is the content to you? And again, that was at 8.38%. So that was based on all of that anecdotal feedback and the empathy work that we did of building up a profile and understanding what it was that they needed. And then how much time do you think you will save each week? And they're almost in line with the others, around almost 7%. It's going to save a significant amount of time, which is roughly the same kind of feedback that we got from the office-based community, who was saying on average it was about 30 minutes per week. So we have 30-odd thousand people in our company. So if they're all potentially saving 30 minutes per week, then you can imagine that's a significant saving. And then the cost saving from that is potentially very significant, which we believe is probably a six-figure sum.
I mean, I think that's been a fantastic insight into your intranet and what you've been doing. I'm always interested to understand what people think the future of intranets are going to be, because obviously we've got quite a lot of things which are changing. We've got AI and things like that, which are
Yeah.
rapidly going to sort of change the way people work. So I'm interested to know, how is AI going to transform an intranet?
Well, I'll caveat my answer by saying I am by no means a digital Luddite. Anyway, I think AI is fantastic, and I think it's as significant an invention as the internet was when that was invented. And I'm old enough to remember that I was at uni at the time. Um, I think AI will be able to enhance the experience where people won't necessarily have to search and crawl the internet. They can ask a question in a chatbot scenario, and then they can get either an answer that's automated through the AI, which directs them to the source of the information they need, or actually answers the question using that source there and then.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's cutting down the amount of time that people actually need to go onto the intranet even more, so they can get the information they need immediately. The downside of that is that if you imagine before AI, when you have an intranet that is not managed properly and you have developed publishing, the amount of content that is built up over the years to the point that you have a bloated experience. As an intranet manager, the last thing I want is broken links anywhere,
Yeah.
but I would easily trade a bloated intranet for a lean, clean intranet that had some broken links on it, because the stuff that works, if that is accurate and adding value, then that's important. Whereas if you've got too much stuff and half of it's out of date, then that just depreciates the value of the stuff that is good.
And to a certain extent, AI is not going to be able to determine
Yeah,
the difference between those things. So someone could be searching, and AI would bring that information back up as if it was gospel, as if that was the
exactly.
native
That's the risk.
real. Yeah.
And it can be completely wrong. And again, in a hypothetical situation, God forbid that, if a procedure at National Grid is changed in the future for whatever reason, but the intranet is not updated. I mean, we would never let this happen, but if if it were to happen and someone then is executing the procedure because they have trust in the intranet and they believe that this is the right way to do it, and then they have an accident because AI sourced the wrong information, then the repercussions of that are, well, scarcely bears thinking about. So generative AI or Gen AI is absolutely crucial. I think it's there as a companion to enable the average human to do more in less time. But it should never be, in my view, you turn something completely over to AI to write something. You can get AI to improve something or draft something initially, but then a human has to then go in and tweak it. Now, whether AI advances in the future where it becomes so clever and intelligent that, none of that is necessary, who knows? But the missing piece in that puzzle is also what I would call Gov AI governance, that we need not only governance to check that the information that AI is sourcing is correct, as you quite rightly point out, but then intranet teams in hundreds of different companies are never properly resourced. If we could get Gen AI to be able to scour your entire intranet and then report back to say, or even make arbitrary decisions and turn stuff off
Mhm.
that hasn't been administered in ages, hasn't been viewed in ages, as long as legal retention schedules are being respected, but machine learning, it can learn all of that stuff,
Yeah.
then it can manage things in ways that a small intranet team wouldn't be able to do. And then they can take on other responsibilities to evolve it further. Even broken link checkers, or if the name of a business unit changes and it's referred to hundreds of thousands of times across your intranet, you could get AI to identify each place and then just change it for you.
Yeah.
Um, then that means that the accuracy of the information is there, and then people continue to have faith in it. I mean, one of my colleagues recently was saying, well, one way around this is that you could get AI to caveat by saying, this is the answer to the question based on the information as of 20th of May 2026 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it could be June 2029 that someone's looking at this information. So then they can pick and choose as to whether or not they act upon that information. And yeah, that's one way around it. But if we've got all this modern technology, why don't we just go the whole hog and make sure that the information is accurate to begin with,
Yeah.
and keep tabs on it so it doesn't then generate yet more and more and more stuff that can go out of date easily. So, yeah, used properly and strategically, then AI is fantastic, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's something that people are going to come to expect as well as part of their day-to-day working life. Um,
Yeah,
as people kind of adopt technologies in their personal life and maybe using the Copilot Personal or ChatGPT or things like that, and they're using it in their
yeah,
day-to-day personal life, they're going to expect it in their work life. And it's almost like a natural evolution that eventually that's going to have to drip through to the experience of using an internet. But definitely, I agree that there's a lot of potential risks that are involved, and it's not
yeah,
just as easy as just slapping AI over the top of an existing intranet. It's only as good as the content that's there to start off with. So I think it makes it even more important, to be honest, to make sure content's up to date, but also the right people have the right access to things, because this is something else that people are finding is that it's surfacing potential vulnerabilities they've always
yeah,
been there. It's just you didn't know it was there because
yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
you haven't looked in the right places, or you haven't clicked the right links or something like that.
Yeah,
Whereas AI doesn't see it in the same kind of way that we see
no,
almost like a
but
flat structure. It sees it almost in three dimensions, and it can go and access
yeah, yeah.
without needing to know how to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, I agree. But that can also be, we can use that to our advantage because then that will expose some of the things that you need to improve.
Yeah.
And that's why talking to, whether it's Unity or Microsoft, it's like, well, I'm glad you're doing Copilot and
Mm.
ChatGPT and all these other things. What about a governance style AI solution as well, not only to parallel Gen AI, but then to get the most out of AI holistically by improving the accuracy of the information.
100%, 100%. And I think we'll start to see more of that. I think I've already heard a lot of whispers and from Microsoft, especially when it comes to kind of they're wanting people to adopt Copilot, wanting them to do all these things, and then they realise there's this massive thing of actually people people don't have all their shop clean and laid out and everything. It's not as easy as that.
Yeah,
And I think there's going to be, as you say, more tools that are going to come out which are going to almost help people do that initial thing of right, let's get all of our sort of ducks in a line first
yeah.
before we actually slap AI over it. And I think more products like that will start to emerge as people are like, yeah, this AI stuff is really cool, it's really great. We'd love to be at that point. It's not just as easy as just sort of switching it on. There's a lot of preparation and things that need to be.
Exactly. And I think I've worked in IT in the past, so I don't feel so bad for dissing sort of IT departments. That a lot of big IT departments in big corporate organizations do tend to want to just sort of chuck new technologies over the proverbial fence.
Mm,
And it's kind of like no one's opposed to that. It's finding the right time to do it
yeah,
and understanding whether an organization is truly ready. Not only the state of the content, but culturally, is the organization ready
yeah.
to adapt to what will be such a monumental change? And I think that segues into the future of intranets, if you wanted to talk about that bit.
Well, yeah. So in terms of it might even be. I think this might be the last slide, to be fair, for future of internet. But yeah, I mean that's basically what I kind of see the future of internet needing to sort of tie in.
Yeah,
Seeing a lot of people trying to have like this, like you refer to this one-stop shop type of single source of truth approach, and a
yeah,
lot of people using Microsoft Teams. So we're seeing people embedding intranets and things like that via Microsoft Teams,
yeah.
using Viva Engage to provide that social element of it and tying it all together. And I think it's the future of intranets to me is trying to bring, rather than trying to force people to go to an intranet, it's to bring the internet to where they are. So definitely I'm seeing that a lot in Teams, but I suppose in a nutshell, what do you see as being the future of an intranet?
So I think you and I are aligned because we've always wanted people to go to the internet, not because they have to, because they want to. And I like what you just said about bringing it to where they are. I think the future of the browser-based experience as a standalone is probably still going to be here in the short to medium term.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons why is because people are adverse to change, and then legacy infrastructure, it takes time to get rid of stuff. I've worked in companies not that long ago that still have to use Internet Explorer because some of their legacy apps don't function on the newer browsers.
Yeah.
But it goes back to that point I was saying earlier that and I don't think this is necessarily associated with specific demographics either, whether it's a younger demographic that will be more for change or not. I think you have to consider your organization as a whole. Does it work well for them to potentially move everything into Microsoft Teams, or should we have a versatile approach? So one of the things that we are pitching is that our grid home intranet will be the employee experience layer or veneer sitting on top of a consolidated digital workplace where the homepage of intranet changes to have aggregate mini portlets leading to Office or ServiceNow or a specific app, HR app, Oracle or SAP or something like that, and that it fluctuates depending on your job role profile. There's a client of Unily that has already come up with a fascinating approach, which is where rather than relying on people to personalize themselves, they have created a massive matrices of what would naturally fit with a particular persona. So, for instance, if you're in marketing, then you're going to get on your portlets of this future homepage, which is your gateway, your front door, a lot of marketing related apps, which would be a contrast to, say, someone in the field or someone in IT, etc. So it's that kind of gateway leading to all of these different locations where your gateway is sort of like a neutral starting position.
Yeah.
So you get to choose, what type of experience do I want or need today? Do I want to raise a ticket with IT? Do I need to do my expenses? Do I need to answer some emails? Or do I want to complete something in Planner for a project that I'm doing, something like that? And then a bit like Teams, where you can look at some of these Office applications within the Teams frame, you can then decide either to do it within the Intranet frame itself or go direct to source. And then to answer your point about, the development of things like with the Viva Suite, so Viva Connections, having a traditional sort of portal-based design injected into Teams,
Yeah.
that is certainly something that we're also very interested in, whether Unily or indeed other. So AppSpace BZ, I've worked on in the past, they have provided an alternative where non-SharePoint based intranets can also render within Teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you have one physical front door to get to all these different experiences, that sort of home position or starting point, as I mentioned. But you can then open that front door from different angles based on your requirements. I'm going to open the front door from the Microsoft Teams end, or I'm going to open it from the mobile or the tablet, or then the browser-based experience. But personally, I don't think the browser-based experience will be around in 10 years. I think it would have been phased out by then, and that we have to start planning now for how do we keep intranets post the phase out of the browser experience relevant.
Yeah.
And the one way that you keep them relevant, in my opinion, is that you give them new meaning by placing them as the front door to your digital workplace. And then the classic comms-driven homepage design of the past will give way to more of a sort of a working dashboard toolkit, which I guess is in a sense a much more advanced version of what you've seen on the field mobile that we were demoing earlier, but for everyone. When that gets realized across different companies, I don't know, because again, cost, legacy infrastructure, and people who are naturally averse to change will all get in the way of it, and then the usual corporate politics.
Brilliant. Well, we're almost out of time now, so I'm just going to go to final pieces, which is just to talk about how Valto can actually help you with something similar to this. So Valto offer a SharePoint Intranet design workshop, which is basically where we go through and talk all the benefits of an intranet, how we would design it in terms of including news, communications, breaking things down into some of the kind of areas, as well as policy management, retention, and sensitivity. I also will just want to do a quick sort of thank you. So thank you, Simon, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been really interesting. Really appreciated that. Thank you to the viewers for actually watching. If you've got any questions, please use the comments feed below. And of course, subscribe to our channel so that you get updates about future webinars, videos related to intranets and other Microsoft tech. So thank you for subscribing, and we hope to see you next time.